Old Path, White Clouds, The Life Story of the Buddha by Thich Nhat Hanh. Book 1, Chapter 3. An Armful of Kusa Grass. Before falling asleep, Svasti sat beneath a bamboo tree and recalled the months he had first met the Buddha. He was just 11 years old then, and his mother had recently died, leaving him in charge of his 3 younger siblings. His youngest sister, an infant, had no milk to drink. Luckily, a man in the village named Armful hired Svasti to tend his water buffaloes, 4 grown buffaloes and 1 calf. And so Svasti was able to milk a buffalo cow every day and feed his baby sister. He tended the water buffaloes with utmost care, for he knew that he had to keep his job or his siblings would starve. Since his father's death, their roof had not been rethatched, and every time it rained, Rupak had to scurry about, placing stone jars beneath the gaping holes to catch the rainwater. Bala was only 6 years old, but had learnt to cook, care for her baby sister, gather firewood in the forest. And though just a small child, she could knead flour into chapati bread for her siblings to eat. Rarely could they buy even a bit of curry powder. When Svasti led the buffaloes back to their stable, the tantalizing fragrance of curry drifting from Armful's kitchen made his mouth water. Chapati dipped in curry sauce, cooked with meat, had been an unknown luxury since his father died. The children's clothes were little more than rags. Svasti owned but 1 worn dhoti. When it was cold, he wrapped an old brown cloth around his shoulders. It was threadbare and faded, but precious to him nonetheless. Svasti had to find good grazing spots for the buffaloes, for if he returned them to their stable hungry, he knew he would be beaten by Mr. Armful. In addition, he had to carry home a sizable bundle of grass every evening for the buffaloes to eat throughout the night. On evenings when the mosquitoes were thick, Svasti lit a fire to chase them away with the smoke. Armful paid him in rice, flour and salt every 3 days. Some days Svasti was able to bring home a few fish that he had caught along the edges of the Naranjara River for Bhima to cook. One afternoon, after he had bathed the buffaloes and cut a bushel of grass, Svasti felt like spending a quiet moment alone in the cool forest. Leaving the buffaloes grazing at the forest edge, Svasti looked about for a tall tree to rest against. Suddenly he stopped. There was a man sitting silently beneath a pipala tree, no more than 20 feet away. Svasti gazed at him in wonder. He had never before seen anyone sit so beautifully. The man's back was perfectly straight, and his feet rested elegantly upon his thighs. He held himself with utmost stability and inner purpose. His eyes appeared to be half closed, and his folded hands rested lightly on his lap. He wore a faded yellow robe which left one shoulder bare. His body radiated peace, serenity and majesty. Just one look at him, and Svasti felt wondrously refreshed. His heart trembled. He did not understand how he could feel something so special for a person he hadn't even met. But he stood immobile, in utter respect, for a long moment. Then the man opened his eyes. He did not see Svasti at first, as he uncrossed his legs and gently massaged his ankles and the soles of his feet. Slowly, he stood up and began to walk. Because he walked in the opposite direction, he still did not see Svasti. Without making a sound, Svasti watched the man take slow, meditative steps along the forest floor. After 7 or 8 such steps, the man turned around, and it was then that he noticed Svasti. He smiled at the boy. No one had ever smiled with such gentle tolerance at Svasti before. As though drawn by an invisible force, Svasti ran towards the man, but when he was within a few feet, he stopped in his tracks, remembering that he had no right to approach anyone of a higher caste. Svasti was an untouchable. He did not belong to any of the 4 social castes. His father had explained to him that the Brahmana caste was the highest, and people born into this caste were priests and teachers who read and understood the Vedas and other scriptures and made offerings to the gods. When Brahma created the human race, the Brahman issued from his mouth. The Kshatriya were the next highest caste. They could hold political and military positions, as they had issued from Brahma's 2 hands. Those of the Vishya caste were merchants and farmers, craftspeople, who had sprung from Brahma's thighs. Those of the Sudra caste had come from Brahma's feet and were the lowest of the 4 castes. They did only manual labor not performed by the higher castes. But Svasti's family members were untouchables, those who had no caste at all. They were required to build their homes outside the village limits, and they did the lowest kind of work, such as collecting garbage, spreading manure, digging roads, feeding pigs, and tending water buffaloes. Everyone had to accept the caste into which he or she was born. The sacred scriptures taught that happiness was the ability to accept one's position. If an untouchable like Svasti touched a person of a higher caste, he would be beaten. In the village of Uruvela, an untouchable man had been beaten severely for touching a Brahman with his hand. A Brahman touched by an untouchable was considered polluted and had to return home to fast and do penance for several weeks in order to cleanse himself. Whenever Svasti led the buffaloes home, he took great pains not to pass near any person of high caste on the road or outside Rambul's house. It seemed to Svasti that even the buffaloes were more fortunate than he, because a Brahman could touch a buffalo without being polluted. Even if, no fault of the untouchable, a person of higher caste accidentally brushed against him, the untouchable could still be ruthlessly beaten. Here, before Svasti, stood a most attractive man, and it was clear from his bearing that he did not share the same social status. Surely someone with so kind and tolerant a smile would not beat Svasti, even if he did touch him. But Svasti did not want to be the cause of pollution of someone so special, and that was why he froze when he and the man were a few steps apart. Seeing Svasti's hesitation, the man stepped forward himself. Svasti stepped back to avoid coming into contact with the man, but the man was quicker, and in the blink of an eye had grasped Svasti by the shoulder with his left hand. With his right hand, he gave Svasti a tender pat on the head. Svasti stood motionless. No one had ever touched him on the head in so gentle and affectionate way, and yet he felt suddenly panic-stricken. "Don't be afraid, child," the man said in a quiet and reassuring voice. At the sound of that voice, Svasti's fears disappeared. He lifted his head and gazed at the man's kind and tolerant smile. After hesitating for a moment, he stammered, "Sir, I like you very much." The man lifted Svasti's chin in his hand and looked into the boy's eyes. "And I like you also. Do you live nearby?" Svasti did not answer. He took the man's left hand in his own two hands and asked the question that was troubling him. "When I touch you like this, aren't you being polluted?" The man laughed and shook his head. "Not at all, child. You are a human being, and I am a human being. You can't pollute me. Don't listen to what people tell you." He took Svasti's hand and walked with him to the edge of the forest. The water buffaloes were still grazing peacefully. The man looked at Svasti and asked, "Do you tend these buffaloes? And that must be the grass you have cut for their dinner. What is your name? Is your house nearby?" Svasti answered politely, "Yes, sir, I care for these 4 buffaloes and that 1 calf, and that is the grass I cut. My name is Svasti, and I live on the other side of the river, just beyond the village of Uruvila. Please, sir, what is your name and where do you live? Can you tell me?" The man answered kindly, "Certainly. My name is Siddhartha, and my home is far away. But at present I am living in this forest. Are you a hermit?" Siddhartha nodded. Svasti knew that hermits were men who usually lived and meditated up in the mountains. Though they had just met and exchanged no more than a few words, Svasti felt a warm bond with his new friend. In Uruvila, no one had ever treated him in so friendly a way or spoken to him with such warmth. A great happiness surged within him, and he wanted to somehow express his joy. If only he had some gift he could offer Siddhartha. But there was no penny in his pocket, not even a piece of sugar cane or rock candy. What could he offer? He had nothing. But he summoned the courage to say, "Mister, I wish I had something to give you as a gift, but I have nothing." Siddhartha looked at Svasti and smiled. "But you do. You have something I would like very much." "I do?" Siddhartha pointed to the pile of Kusa grass. "That grass you have cut for the buffaloes is soft and fragrant. If you could give me a few handfuls, I shall make a sitting cushion for my meditation beneath the tree. That would make me very happy." Svasti's eyes shone. He ran to the pile of grass, gathered a large bundle in his thin arms, and offered it to Siddhartha. "I just cut this grass down by the river. Please accept it. I can easily cut more for the buffaloes." Siddhartha placed his hands together like a lotus bud and accepted the gift. He said, "You are a very kind boy. I thank you. Go and cut some more grass for your buffaloes before it grows too late. If you have a chance, please come and see me tomorrow afternoon in the forest again." Young Svasti bowed his head in farewell and stood watching as Siddhartha disappeared back into the forest. Then he picked up his sickle and headed for the shore, his heart filled with the warmest of feelings. It was early autumn. The Kusa grass was still soft, and his sickle was newly sharpened. It wasn't long at all before Svasti had cut another large armful of Kusa grass. Svasti led the buffaloes to Rambul's home, guiding them to cross a shallow section of the Neranjara River. The calf was reluctant to leave the sweet grass along the shore, and Svasti had to coax her along. The bushel of grass on his shoulder was not heavy, and Svasti waded across the river together with the buffaloes. Chapter 4. The Wounded Swan. Early the next morning, Svasti led his buffaloes to graze. By noon, he had cut enough grass to fill 2 baskets. Svasti liked to let the buffaloes graze on the side of the river which bordered the forest. That way, when he finished gathering grass, he could stretch out in the cool breeze and not worry about the buffaloes wandering into someone's rice fields. He carried only his sickle, the tool by which he earned his living. Svasti opened the small fistful of rice Bala had wrapped in a banana leaf for his lunch. But as he was about to eat, his thoughts turned to Siddhartha. I could take this rice to the hermit Siddhartha, he thought. Surely he won't find my rice too humble. Svasti wrapped the rice and, leaving the buffaloes at the forest edge, followed the path to where he had met Siddhartha the day before. From a distance he saw his new friend sitting beneath the great pipala tree. But Siddhartha was not alone. Before him sat a girl just about Svasti's age, dressed in a fine white sari. There was food already placed before him, and Svasti stopped abruptly. But Siddhartha looked up and called to him, Svasti. He motioned for the boy to join them. The girl in the white sari looked up, and Svasti recognized her as someone he had often passed on the village road. As Svasti approached, she moved to her left to make a place for him, and Siddhartha gestured for him to sit down. In front of Siddhartha was a banana leaf, which held a fistful of rice and a small amount of sesame salt. Siddhartha divided the rice into 2 portions. Have you eaten yet, child? No, mister, I haven't. Well then, let's share this. Siddhartha handed Svasti half the rice, and Svasti joined his palms together in thanks, but refused the rice. He took out his own humble rice and said, I've also brought some. He opened his banana leaf to reveal coarse grains of brown rice, unlike the soft white grains on Siddhartha's leaf. He had no sesame salt. Siddhartha smiled at the 2 children and said, Shall we put all our rice together and share it? He took half the white rice, dipped it in sesame salt, and handed it to Svasti. Then he broke off half of Svasti's rice ball and began to eat it with obvious delight. Svasti felt awkward, but seeing Siddhartha's naturalness, he began to eat as well. Your rice is so fragrant, mister. Sujata brought it, answered Siddhartha. So her name is Sujata, thought Svasti. She looked a bit older than Svasti, perhaps by a year or 2. Her large black eyes twinkled. Svasti stopped eating and said, I've seen you before on the village road, but I didn't know your name was Sujata. Yes, I am the daughter of the village chief of Uruvela. Your name is Svasti, isn't it? Teacher Siddhartha was just telling me about you, she said, adding gently, Svasti, it's more correct to call a monk teacher than mister. Svasti nodded. Siddhartha smiled. Well then, I don't need to introduce you two. Do you know, children, why I eat in silence? These grains of rice and sesame are so precious. I like to eat silently so that I can appreciate them fully. Sujata, have you ever had a chance to taste brown rice? Even if you've already eaten, please taste a bit of Svasti's rice. It is quite delicious. Now then, we can eat together in silence, and when we've finished, I'll tell you a story. Siddhartha broke off a piece of brown rice and handed it to Sujata. She joined her palms like a lotus and respectfully accepted it. The three of them ate quietly in the deep calm of the forest. When the rice and sesame were gone, Sujata gathered the banana leaves. She took a jug of fresh water from her side and poured some into the only cup she had brought. She lifted the cup to offer water to Siddhartha. He took it in his two hands and offered it to Svasti. Flustered, Svasti blurted, "Please, mister, I mean teacher, please, you take the first drink." Siddhartha answered in a soft voice, "You drink first, child. I want you to have the first drink." Again he lifted and offered the cup to Svasti. Svasti felt confused, but didn't know how to refuse such an unaccustomed honor. He joined his palms in thanks and took the cup. He drank all the water in one long gulp. He handed the cup back to Siddhartha. Siddhartha asked Sujata to pour a second cup. When it was full, he raised it to his lips and sipped the water slowly, with reverence and deep enjoyment. Sujata's eyes did not stray from Siddhartha and Svasti during this exchange. When Siddhartha finished drinking, he asked Sujata to pour a third cup. This one he offered to her. She put down the water jug, joined her palms, and accepted the cup of water. She lifted it to her lips and drank in slow, small sips, just as Siddhartha had done. She was aware that this was the first time she had ever drunk from the same cup as an untouchable. But Siddhartha was her teacher, and if he had done so, why shouldn't she? And she noticed that she had no feeling whatsoever of being polluted. Spontaneously, she reached out and touched the buffalo boy's hair. It was such a surprise. Svasti didn't have a moment to move out of the way. Then Sujata finished drinking her water. She placed the empty cup on the ground and smiled at her two companions. Siddhartha nodded. "You children have understood. People are not born with caste. Everyone's tears are salty, and everyone's blood is red. It is wrong to divide people into castes and create division and prejudice amongst them. This has become very clear to me during my meditation." Sujata looked thoughtful, and she spoke. "We are your disciples, and we believe your teaching. But there does not seem to be anyone else like you in this world. Everyone else believes that the Sudras and the untouchables came forth from the Creator's feet. Even the scriptures say so. No one dares to think differently." "Yes, I know. But the truth is the truth, whether anyone believes it or not. Though 1,000,000 people may believe a lie, it is still a lie. You must have great courage to live according to the truth. Let me tell you a story about when I was a boy. One day, when I was 9 years old, and strolling alone in the garden, a swan suddenly dropped from the sky and writhed on the ground in front of me in great pain. I ran to pick it up, and I discovered that an arrow had deeply penetrated one of its wings. I clasped my hand firmly around the arrow's shaft and yanked it out, and the bird cried as blood oozed from its wound. I applied pressure to the wound with my finger to stop the bleeding, and took the bird inside the palace to find Princess Sundari, the lady in waiting. She agreed to pick a handful of medicinal leaves and make a poultice for the bird's wound. The swan shivered, so I took off my jacket and wrapped it around her. Then I placed her close to the royal fireplace. Siddhartha paused for a moment to look at Svasti. Svasti, I did not yet tell you, but when I was young, I was a prince, the son of King Suddhodana in the city of Kapilavatthu. Sujata knows this already. I was about to go and find some rice for the swan when my 8-year-old cousin, Devadatta, burst into the room. He was clutching his bow and arrows, and he asked excitedly, "Siddhartha, did you see a white swan fall down near here?" Before I could answer, Devadatta saw the swan resting by the fireplace. He ran towards it, but I stopped him. "You may not take the bird." My cousin protested. "That bird is mine. I shot it myself." I stood between Devadatta and the swan, determined not to let him have it. I told him, "This bird is wounded. I am protecting it. It needs to stay here." Devadatta was quite stubborn and not about to give in. He argued, "Now listen, cousin. When this bird was flying in the sky, it didn't belong to anyone. As I'm the one who shot it out of the sky, it rightfully belongs to me." His argument sounded logical, but his words made me angry, and I knew there was something wrong with his reasoning, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. So I just stood there, speechless, becoming more upset. I felt like punching him. Why I didn't, I don't know. Then I saw a way to answer him. "Listen, cousin," I told him. "Those who love each other live together, and those who are enemies live apart. You tried to kill the swan, so you and she are enemies. The bird cannot live with you. I saved her, bandaged her wound, warmed her, and was on my way to find food for her when you arrived. The bird and I love each other, and we can live together. The bird needs me, not you." Sujata clapped her hands together. "That's right, you were right." Siddhartha looked at Svasti. "And what do you think, child, of my statement?" Svasti thought for a moment, and then he answered slowly, "I think you were right, but not many people would agree. Most people would side with Devadatta." Siddhartha nodded. "You were right. Most people do follow Devadatta's view." Let me tell you what happened next. As we couldn't agree on our own, we decided to take our concern to the adults. That day there was a meeting of the government in the palace, so we scurried to the Hall of Justice where they were meeting. I held the swan, and Devadatta clasped his bow and arrows. We presented our problem to the ministers and asked them to render judgment. The affairs of state came to a halt as the men listened, first to Devadatta and then to me. They discussed the matter at length, but they were also unable to agree. The majority seemed to be leaning towards Devadatta, when my father, the king, suddenly cleared his throat and coughed a few times. All the ministers suddenly stopped speaking. And, tell me if you don't think this is odd, with total accord, they agreed that my argument was correct and that the bird should be given to me. Devadatta was beside himself with anger, but of course there was nothing he could do. I had the bird, but I wasn't really happy. Even though I was still young, I knew that my victory had been less than honourable. I was given the bird because the ministers wanted to please my father, not because they saw the truth of what I said. That's sad, Sujata said, and frowned. Yes, it was. But turning my thoughts to the bird, I took comfort in the fact that she was safe. Otherwise, she should surely have ended up in the cooking pot. In this world, few people look with the eyes of compassion, and so we are cruel and merciless towards each other. The weak are always oppressed by the strong. I still see that my reasoning that day was correct, for it arose from love and understanding. Love and understanding can ease the suffering of all beings. The truth is the truth, whether or not it is accepted by the majority. Therefore, I tell you, children, it takes great courage to stand up for and protect what is right. What happened to the Swan, teacher? Asked Sujata. For 4 days I cared for her. When I saw that her wound had healed, I released her, after warning her to fly far away, lest she be shot at again. Siddhartha looked at the 2 children, their faces quiet and serious. Sujata, you must return home before your mother begins to worry. Svasti, isn't it time for you to return your buffaloes and cut more grass? The armful of Kusa grass you gave me yesterday made a perfect cushion for meditation. Last night and this morning I sat upon it, and my meditation was very peaceful. I saw many things clearly. You have been a great help, Svasti. As my understanding deepens, I shall share the fruit of my meditation with both you children. Now I will continue sitting. Svasti looked down at the grass, which Siddhartha had shaped into a cushion. Though the grasses were packed firm, Svasti knew they were still fragrant and soft. He would bring his teacher a fresh armful of grass every 3 days to make a new cushion. Svasti stood up, and with Sujata joined his palms and bowed to Siddhartha. Sujata set out for home, and Svasti led his buffaloes to graze further along the river bank. Dear friends, that's where we pause in our story for today. I wish you a peaceful night. Thank you for listening. Sleep well.